Hello. Hi, Not Your Family WhatsApp is a curatorial project that's co-curated by University of Southern California MA in Curatorial Studies graduate Loujain and University of California Davis MFA graduate and Los Angeles-based artist Zeina Baltagi. This project centers around WhatsApp as a digital platform that allows for global communication. We are exploring the connectivity of the platform and the way we communicate in the diaspora. We are interested in the specific aesthetics of circulated still and moving images and the audio components that are sent in WhatsApp group messages. We have been inspired by our own family's interactions and the things that we send to each other. So the goal with this project was to create a multi-layered exhibition that included a lecture series, a virtual exhibit, and a public window display that will be visible from the street at Coaxial Arts Foundation in downtown Los Angeles. And today I'm very excited to be speaking with my co-curator, Loujain about futurism and science fiction. My name is Zeina Baltagi, and I go by she, her pronouns. And I am tuning in from Los Angeles, California.
Thank you, Zeina. That was like so beautiful. So I think we should all go through introductions. You kind of introduced me already. I'm she, her pronouns. Currently in Miami visiting my family, so we're pre-recording this, and then it will be streamed in the future, which also goes into like our whole like communication and like being able to talk to one another virtually through different times and spaces, which I think is very relevant. You're in LA, I'm in Miami, and everyone here is almost in like different places. So I'm gonna hand it over to everyone to kind of introduce themselves a little bit about their work and their like, you know, where they're at and everything. So Matthias, if you could please start us off since you're next to me, like virtually next to me in the Zoom. So yeah. Excited to hear about you.
Thank you so much, Loujain and Zeina, for organizing this. It's a really great honor for me to be here. My name is Matthias. I use the pronouns he, his. I am not actually an artist, although I do work at an art school at the Virginia Commonwealth University School of the Arts in Qatar, in the Middle East. I'm a historian of science, a historian of ideas, a historian of science fiction, and I have worked especially on science and science fiction in the Arab and Muslim world. I'm very, very grateful to IB Tauris, a publisher in London, for publishing 2 books of mine. One is called Space Science and the Arab World, and the other most recent book is Islam, Science Fiction, and Extraterrestrial Life. And I'm so excited to speak to everybody today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I currently have one of your books and it's so amazing. And I bought the other one you have about Saudi. I haven't been able to read it yet, but I'm so excited because that's like my research is about Saudi artists. So I'm kind of fan-hurling a little bit, but yeah, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Let's go with Alia Ali because you're next on the screen. We're just gonna do it like virtually, who's next to one another. So yeah, thank you. Looking forward to you introducing yourself.
Thank you. Thanks so much for including me, for inviting me. It's also an honor to be here with these 3 artists. It's great to meet you. This is the first time that we're meeting, and so it's interesting that it's digital. My name is Alia Ali. My pronouns are she, her, hiya, hunna. I am Yemeni Bosnian and from the United States by passport. I work with both still and moving image. I started in photography, but I am interested in creating and carving out new spaces and portals through the use of textiles and patterns. Recently, in the last 3 years, I've been focusing a lot on the conflict in my country, Yemen, and how it works in relationship to having that sort of parasitic relationship between my native land and my adoptive land that sort of feeds off of the other. And rather than kind of responding to it from a defensive way, in the sense that Yemenis are not victims or culprits, but starting a new narrative, which sort of has become, and therefore sort of carving out a new future that is not one that is dystopic as the present that is being set out by our colonizers. Yeah, so I've been, I guess what I kind of pull from is not necessarily science fiction, but rather truths of ancient pasts. And I think that's already something that I'm really interested in talking about this, that it's something that's already seen as alien, something that is fabricated, but in fact, a lot of that is drawn from our ancestral knowledge that we know in and of ourselves and in our roots. So my greatest inspiration is Malika Balqis from 3,000 years ago, from the Sabaeans. And if I can, if I know and reactivate what is considered a dead language or a dead civilization that was 3,000 years ago, then surely I can imagine 3,000 years from now. And so I'm excited to jump into these dialogues. Thank you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And I also have your art book in my, I kind of have everyone's like work in my house, and I'm so excited and honored to have every one of you. And it, you know, you have such a great thing about like the past and the future kind of overlapping and being like this dystopian type of thing in the way that we communicate. And that's like so great. And so excited to get into that with you. But Zulfi, like, Zulfikar, please like introduce yourself. We're so excited. Love your earrings. Had to mention that in the Zoom too.
Thank you, shukran. Assalamu alaikum, Alia Ali Madad. We are pre-filming this. It is the second day of Muharram. I want to always insert the Shia narrative wherever I can. I have some of my brothers and sisters here too. You're all my brothers and sisters, but anyway. So it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. Matthias, I'm already like side panel sort of ordering your book somewhere on Amazon. And I love the idea of being able to imagine the past, and therefore, why not be able to imagine the future if we can see both, why not? So already, I'm so thrilled to be here. I've worked with some of you as well. My work deals with, of course, futurism from the Muslim worldview. I do so mainly through textile work, primarily screen print on fabric, embroidery, sequins, as well as film and performance. So it's a whole world building project. I don't limit myself. Currently, I'm working on a film series, but a lot of my work has been textile, generally speaking. And I'm joining you from Karachi, Pakistan. And that's it.
Also, you're a curator. I saw that show. I have that book in my it's amazing. So like,
Thank
just
you.
to
I'm
to
also
also
a
mention.
curator.
Yeah,
Thank
there you go.
Also,
There you go.
I
Toot
forgot
your
about
horn.
that. You know, I
Yeah.
do like one a year, so I sometimes I'm just like, oh, it slips. So I
Do all the things. Yeah. So thank you for that introduction. Hushi, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Hushidar Mortezaie, and I'm an Iranian that was coerced to come here as a child, but I guess I would consider I'm Iranian American. I've been here since in the United States since I was 2.5. I am he, him, although a lot of times I think that I'm, you know, non-binary in a way, but I think I'm fine with that label. But I'm a fashion designer and a visual artist and a graphic designer, and I've been working in my different worlds for, I think, almost 30 years now. And really the base of my practice has been like so many of us here, like creating different worlds and universes, because the world outside didn't seem to be it didn't seem to express what I like. It didn't reflect me, and I felt like a gharib. And so, you know, going through different time periods, especially of Iranian identity in the United States, like I had to create almost like a fantasy land, and through fashion and textile design, I create characters and I build other universes. So I think the future for me has a lot, and I really want to thank you, Alia, because it really is about the truth. And futurism can be considered to just be like, you know, sci-fi and digital and techno, but I think it's important for us to be able to speak about ourselves, not through a lens that's not of us. And also, I think like I have been going through a real transformative process where identity itself for me is dissolving, because I see a greater need in unity of all of us, especially as we come together and look at what we have done to this planet. Because I want to escape through my universe, but then it's like, this is a real like issue. And so it's strange because my practice was so a specific way, but I feel like it's morphing slowly and it's bodily affecting me and everything. So it's an exciting time, and I'm very honored to be here with all of you. I have worked with several of you, but I'm so excited to learn more about all your individual practices, and your books are incredible. It's so exciting. It's really exciting, Matthias, to actually hear about that. And of course, John and Anum, and you know, so it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so lovely to have you, and please like plug in your like shop. You know, we need to support you and your clothes. It's like so amazing the way that you merge like the past and the future and just like evolve, and you know your practice is constantly evolving, and it's kind of like what we're talking about today, because there is no future without the past and without honoring our ancestors, and that's like so important and like so beautiful. And like even digital communication, like when we're talking about WhatsApp, like how we talk to like you know, in the diaspora, like our family members that we might have not even met, but, you know, are able to connect through that way. But like last but not least, Anum, please like introduce yourself. I love your hair, by the way. That's so beautiful. It's my first time seeing your green hair. It's amazing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad you got to see it because I'm about to get rid of it soon. It's just fading away. It's turning into a different color now. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here with you all. My name is Anum. My pronouns are they and them. I am originally from Pakistan, and I've been living in the US for quite a while now. I'm reaching that confusing part where in a few years I would have lived more of my life in the US than in Pakistan. So it's a weird little identity crisis. But in terms of my work, I am a new media artist, a creative technologist, and an interaction designer. And most of my art practice has focused on creating these experiences of transcendence around themes of queerness, nostalgia, and non-Western histories. And a lot of this work manifests as immersive installations or projected visuals or interactive programmed electronics. I feel like it just kind of keeps changing as I keep learning new things and developing new interests. And yeah, just want to echo what everyone's been saying about, you know, being really interested in creating these worlds that didn't exist, that are queer, Muslim, hybrid, you know, just stuff that I was really seeking and just decided to start building it. And yeah, I'll stop there for now. Thank you, Anu. I'm so excited to talk with all of you. We could continue the subject of creating worlds for ourselves, how we've done that for ourselves in different forms in our art practice, and maybe how we investigate that in our research. Because there's two things that are being clear, is looking to the future, but also imagining past times, which is still an imagined space. So essentially creating imagined spaces that are still rooted in truth and reality. Can we carry on with that conversation a little further, because it's a really big one and exciting one. I really love that touch to the ancestral as well, and how that ties into the future. Yeah.
I wonder though if it's actually, there's part of it in which it perhaps, you know, thinking about this term of the fact that the worlds that didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting that several of us on this panel are talking about textiles and work with textiles. And the fact that we come from cultures where textile is a language. I mean, in Latin, when you think about it, the root of the word textile is textare. So actually text came from textile. It's not the other way around, the woven word. And so the language that we use is also through pattern. That is not something that might be legible by the West, might not be, but is not, and is something that we can use to create these sort of transcendent experiences. So I wonder, when we're saying the worlds that don't exist, or the worlds, maybe that I would maybe argue to say that the worlds always did exist. It's perhaps revealing them. And revealing them in a way, the fact that we have a privilege of being in a way a part of the diaspora, to have these simultaneous existences and work with many different languages that are not just literal and written, but also understood and experienced and felt, in which we can kind of reveal them through our own lens rather than by the lens of the Gharb. I thought, Hushi, you said something so beautiful. Actually, if we're going to talk about this, you said gharib, and it made me think linguistically. Gharib in Arabic, it means strange. I don't know how it is in Farsi, but the root of the word gharib is ghurba, gharb, which is the same word for West. And when we're thinking about the strangeness, I think it's also maybe perhaps what we're doing is rather just turning the lens and the gaze and the perspective and shifting it, that it's coming from us rather than through the translation of either our colonizers or the place in which we're being forced to assimilate and refusing that.
Gharib in Urdu means poor, which I think is very interesting. That it goes from yeah, it's the same root. It's the same root. It comes from Gharb, it comes from the Arabic, but it literally means like financially, like without money. Talking about, I think Urdu is a very funny language because it actually takes Arabic and Persian and then does weird things with the translation and the way it goes. And it's a very, very strange language, but this is interesting to think of how strangeness could mean a certain kind of familial poverty, I guess, as well, perhaps. Or to be from the West, you could also say it could be a sort of, forgive me, but a cultural poverty, perhaps. I'm not sure. I certainly felt that coming to the West. I felt certainly a sense of, like it, overfunded, but under everything else. You know what I mean? Like there's so much wealth built upon culture rather than through culture. It's built over other worlds, right? It's not built, it's not an evolution from these places, it's a massacre. It's tombstones. The US is tombstones. Its cities are tombstones. Its skyscrapers are tombstones. It's a graveyard. I mean, of course, there are many living cultures, indigenous cultures that are still there. I'm not saying that there aren't, but I certainly felt that. And I think coming, just to sort of go on from what you were saying, coming to the US, it's been interesting because I have sort of in one way or another moved back to Pakistan. I'm here now, and coming to the US, I think for me, I was hungry for home. And then I also saw a certain kind of injustice playing in the United States as well that couldn't be ignored either. So I had the inspiration from the tension of the injustice and the Islamophobia, you know, that was at play even in Obama's America, right? We all think that Islamophobia started with Trump for some reason. We all just like forgot, you know, everything. I mean, we did it, but Yani, the other ones did. And like, so, you know, I mean, the tension of the Islamophobia was inspiring, but I was thirsty, I was hungry for home. And I think, you know, coming for grad school, I had the privilege in this space to think about home in a different way. And a home that I wanted to come back to, or a history that I felt was being missed. And I think being in the West, being in grad school, having the privilege of being in grad school and creating my work allowed me the privilege to think of that. And I'm realizing that now more coming back is that actually, as you know, futurism is still a big love of mine. I'm still working on a futurist film series. I'm working actually with Hushidar and Anum on this series as well. So, and the inspiration is still there, of course, and people are on board and everyone is feeling it too. But I feel that my work is now starting to veer towards the present. Still a mystical place, still a magical place, but a present, a present reality here. Not to say that futurism is not connected with the present, it very much is. But I see that shift. You know, I had the space to think about what the future looked like in the US. And now here, because I'm so deep in the issues that affect the third world, you know, I say it in the political terminology, the third world, or the global south, whatever. I mean, in the sense that because it's everywhere around me, I can't help but be present in it now. So I think that's been an interesting shift in my consciousness. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I guess I'm curious just on that home, because I'm interested in that privilege. I wonder what Hushi and Anum think, because you're right about that privilege where I can't go home. So what happens when, and what, you know, even if I did, even there's this active erasure that is happening not only of the land, you know, by not only the United States, but by Saudis, by the Emiratis, by the French, by the Germans, the people that go unrevealed, and the active land grabbing that is happening in Yemen, where, to be honest with you, I think about these different futurist, you know, you know, indigenous futurism, I think about Afrofuturism. I think about how there's this notion of clearing of space, that even going back to Yemen, I would still be a gharib, you know, and I'm curious about this, where there are these, you know, there's a space in between where we can no longer imagine our future or our existence on a horizontal plane, because we're so actively trying to be erased across borders and in different places. And so the only way to think about it is on vertical planes, in which we are to look at the stars and remind ourselves that we're actually star people, going back to the myths that even are pre-Islamic, pre-Judaic, where we were worshiping the sun, we were worshiping these beautiful, you know, the elements of the earth. And so what happens when that home is no longer a physical place, but a sense of being? And so I think about, you know, I wonder for Hushi and Anum also, like, where do you think, I mean, do you go back to what is home? Do you feel, how does that affect your work? Like, does your studio become that space of home? How?
Anum, do you want to go? Or? Well, it's so relevant to what I'm personally going through. Stranger in gharib in Farsi, gharibe means stranger. So it, and you know, when I was young, I always thought it was like almost like Lady Gaga, born this way, or unique, or, you know, looking at it in a different way. But it is very isolating and it's very alienating. And so my earlier work was about reversing the alien and being like, no, you can't read this, but it's amazing and I'm going to alienate you. And so after a long time, now I find myself, I cannot go back to Iran. And not only can I go back, I cannot go back to Iran for specific reasons. I would be arrested or, you know, but Iran, like right now, it's a very, very difficult moment in the history of Iran. But it's also, there is a little bit of hope. But a lot of the writing and work that I've been doing with different like magazines and journals has been about a death, because Iran is going through a total opportunistic, like, you know, massacre of all sides coming to like attack, including its own government, which is there. Basically, it's remaining there so that like these two forces, specifically Israel and Saudi Arabia, don't go on. So it's very difficult, because when you're living in Iran and there is water is, you know, there's shortage of water, there is no, I mean, I speak to my relatives every day, and it's very difficult because I am completely privileged, but I feel like a pariah because I am feeling that pain, and every day it's like I'm grieving. So it's a very emotional journey, which I know that you understand, because it's like I don't see like a, you know, a fairy tale happy resilience power. It's like very nihilist right now. And I can't even, you know, before there would be a time where you would like, you know, you would create for that. But the most random person I have just met was Gugush. And she's a famous like singer. And we had this in her, with all her monarchist tendencies and stuff like that, to speak about it is, and to create art is so, it feels almost like privileged and irrelevant when you just want to do something to help, but then you're just sitting there. So I'm you know, I have been so gray and dark for like the past month, you know, and I have no issues. I'm here living next to the ocean, totally privileged, whiter than white. I'm more like Western than West can be. And uh, so that makes me like kind of have to be like, okay, I can't do this black and white language. Like I have to like kind of put that aside. And what's even more important is time and the passage of time, of the past and the future. They're just like, it's moot at this point. So it, like Zulfi, I feel myself coming into my practice being more about the present, but it's really a query and a question that I'm not sure. I have no definitive answer, because they can tell you that your father or whoever is dying, but once they die, it's like, so it's a very, there's a sense of power, because, you know, what I have to orchestrate personally as an artist and dealing with the diaspora, which is an absolute nightmare, dealing with the Iranian diaspora. They are just the most opinionated, and they're all kind of like, if you critique the government, then this is very small. The majority of people are the pro-monarchists and the like they want Trump at that time to go in and bomb. And I'm like, what are you thinking? So I have to like field them and be cognizant of them, because if I say anything that is too like pro-Islam or anything that's like progressive or leftist, like original thought, like I'm not talking about here now, I'm talking about the past of the 50s, of what I learned from my father, like from Tude and all that. And it's very difficult. It's like a minefield. But then when I think about myself, I become almost mute and deaf, to where I'm like, what am I? I'm like, I have no issues. how can I help my people? And then in the end, the answer comes, which is a slogan that Iranians use in Iran to the diaspora, lengesh kon, which means mind your own business, drop it, like gom shuk, get out of here. And so it just, so then I have to just be on mute, right? Because I'm this privileged, like whatever, like whoever in the West. And then I'm really kind of in a moment where I don't know anything, and there's something very liberating about that. And then I feel that from my family and I have so many friends and such brilliant, talented people that are facing this uncertainty of this man that is considered supposedly like a mass murderer has been elected because no one cared in this election. And, you hear so many things, but you just are worried about the people that live there, and then the resources and like you said about going back to that kind of the notion of the sun and nature, that has actually saved my life. And that is a very futurist and ancient way of being. And like that was something that I was taught through Islam, actually, by my aunt and my mother, about the importance of nature as spirituality. So, I'm kind of in a very strange space. It's a very emotional space, and it has affected me physically. I have gotten ill again after so long of, so it's but I actually welcome all of it. I'm sorry with the hands, it's ridiculous. It's like I'm voguing or something, but I have to kind of resort into going and just like pushing all of it out so I don't have a little tantrum like a spoiled brat, like, because I'm protected, protected against COVID and everything. And I just go to textiles and I create, and I keep finding myself painting, like, like I do this practice with automotive paints on metal mesh. I keep finding myself painting these like ancient folkloric monsters in like mini skirts that are actually from our ancient history of Dives, and so I don't know what exactly is happening, but it's like everything is failing, but then everything is new. So I don't have definitive answers, and I think right now is not the time for a definitive answer, because everything is really the spectrum. Every part of life is a spectrum, everything. So I'm sorry, I was getting a little emotional. So I'm like shutting you out, and when you have such beautiful things to say. Thank you.
Oh, it's all good. I feel like so much of what you said, like just like the complexity with the feeling of home and not being there and being here, and that distance is so much to process. And even though my situation is quite different from yours, I feel like some of those things that you mentioned are like, I can really relate to it. I do have the privilege of going back to Pakistan, and I do go every now and then, so I feel a little more connected. But I would say that where I'm at right now is like there actually is no sort of physical home. It's just like it's a work in progress. It's wherever I am, because it feels like kind of living in a constant state of longing for this home, and then you go to that home and then it's just so disappointing, and then you come back here and it's just so disappointing, and it's just nothing is, I don't know where that space exists. And I think that's maybe, why we start creating these artworks and these spaces and worlds, is so that we can experience that feeling that no physical space is really able to provide. And I think, yeah, Zulfi, you started this, you started speaking about being more in the present and like moving away from this idea of futurism. And that actually also resonates with me, because I feel like things are just getting so bad, and I'm moving at such a fast speed that I feel like the work that I'm making is not able to catch up to the speed at which everything is happening. And especially just sort of looking at this last year and thinking about like science fiction in the way that we have thought about it for so long, like, you know, like life on Mars and aliens, and there's just like in sort of the most traditional ways, it's actually happening. Like we have these like bunch of billionaires who are actively suddenly colonizing space, and this is no longer something that is out of the books and novel. And you know, they have sort of destroyed the earth and are now making these exit strategies for space tourism, space colonization. And you know, I don't want to exist in this future where they built that outer space world, and yet that might be our only option at some point. And it's just really stressful to think about, I think.
Can I just add something? It's totally history repeating itself. Like it feels like here we are again, once these motherfuckers are doing, excuse my language, are claiming the same thing. And I think that's where somehow someone needs to have a militia into like that, to have a space or place, you know. It's just, it's like they're the same thing. It's like every single president of this country, every single millionaire, they're all the same. It's like, so I'm sorry, I just had to add that. It resonated.
But I'm curious, since we're talking about space travel, and I feel like a lot of us have done work with space travel. Anum and I actually collaborated on some videos with these mosque minarets going into space, meant to be for queer Muslim like refugees that hybridize with aliens, not meant for Jeff Bezos. I've also made them into giant textile pieces. But I'm really curious to talk to the person who's actually written about Muslim space travel, Matthias. Like what are your thoughts on all of this, on this idea of futurism that we're all sort of grappling with, like the future is now, if it's, you know, what is it connected to, history, past, reality, not reality, escapism? I'm wondering within your field of research, what you might be able to add to that.
Thank you so much, Zulfikar. I'm so excited by this conversation. Like my head is just full of like all these ideas that you've been talking about. I love the idea that historians, just like futurists, are imaginative creators, right? The far future is a place that we can't go, that we can only imagine. And of course, the past is a place that we can't go to, unless we invent a time machine. And of course, whatever record we have of the past is always fragmentary, right? We just have memories, we have bits of text, we have artifacts from the past, and the rest we have to fill with our imagination. And even though I introduced myself as not being an artist, I do feel that historians or anybody who does write, whether it's about the past or the future, is very, very creative. Like other ideas that you've discussed were obviously about the West and also the East. A question that I perhaps had for all of you would be, is it helpful to speak of a Muslim world? Is it helpful to speak about the Western world or an Eastern world? Or should we just focus on the planet as one world? Should we just say that we live here on Earth and that is one world? So maybe with that question, I'll hand it back to you.
Ooh.
A good one.
I have to say that question kind of enrages me. And it enrages me to the point, because when we're talking about historians, I'm so happy that you acknowledge that it's creative, because it's accepted as something that is the truth, like languages, you know, verbal language. And in fact, I'm, you know, speaking from, you know, my own perspective. you know, much of our history, you know, Yemen, we have an oral history. Even our tribal law is oral. It's been carried down hundreds, you know, millennia. And the first time that it was written was already a translation by our colonizers in languages that weren't ours and weren't meant for us. So really our history was never told on our terms. And so when I think about where our place is in which history and how it's been sort of actively, even through that, actively erased. And when you use the word fragment, I think it's very appropriate as well. I appreciate how you put that, because I'm now working on a large sculpture, which is of an octopus, essentially, that's stealing back, that's a starship that is stealing back all of our looted artifacts from the British Museum, the Smithsonian. Even when I look at them in these places, they're just marked as Southern Arabia. So when we're talking about the binary, you're right, I even participated this in what is this East and West. That's already problematic, because where is the East and where is the West, and who's the one who's defined it? Most of it, which has been the Greenwich line, which is our colonizers. You know, and we keep thinking about it again as this horizontal division, but we're not considering the vertical ones. And the reason why the vertical ones are so important to me is because the vertical ones include our myths. And when we're talking about the vertical ones, are the myths and the stories that we look at when we talked about the stars. We come from some of the ancient, when we're thinking about Pakistan, I mean, people who are present here in Pakistan, Iran, you know, and I say Yemen, not the Arab world, because I feel so disassociated with the Arabs, because they're the ones who are also actively trying to erase us, even though all Arabs come from Yemen. It's embarrassment to be considered also an Arab right now. And that's the rage. And so when I think about when going into space, the story that I base it off of is Najm al-Ahmar, the Red Star, where it's believed that Solomon has given Malika Balqis a jinniya, you know, an extraterrestrial, an alien, a warrior, a matriarch, because it's unbelievable that a woman has that much power, has given her this red star. And then in 1997, when NASA has first entered and sent the Pathfinder to Mars, 3 Yemeni Qabilis, who are primitives, according to the Western media, try to sue NASA for invading our inherited star. And this is, you know, documented in CNN and everything, in the BBC, in Al-Thori. But to me, that's this amazing point of departure, because it talks about, it's not about physically colonizing, but it's also colonizing this, what is now Mars and not the sun and not Venus, this red star, but it's occupying our dreams. It's occupying our myths. And I think this is where there's the danger. And I'm looking, you know, to Hushi, like also what you were mentioning, I completely understand there's this sort of paralysis, what I hear from you, of having these sort of this real present that feeds, that is also kind of being pushed onto us and being identified. We are being identified by the other media, by medias, by our own societies. But I just will interject with this story, Pine and Crane in Los Angeles. I went to Pine and Crane, and there was a server who was there, and everybody had to wait outside, and he was wearing the most beautiful shirt that had Farsi written on it. It was amazingly colorful. Everybody's waiting, and everybody's like looking at this person back and forth. And I stopped him, and 4 of us started to have a conversation about how amazing the shirt was. And I was like, oh, this is this amazing artist, Hushi. And we were swooning over this. And the only reason I say this is not to, I know you're not looking for that, but I guess our position right now is actually to, as artists, and I do with our privilege, is actually to be showing our beauty and the potential and our possibilities, rather than being seen through the suffering, that there is so much of it. And the fact that some of our art, like yours, in that moment, we're seeing it for its potential, for the beauty, rather than as this evil. And that to me is such that is a shield. It's a weapon, if we will. It's an active intervention that that somehow speaks louder than the cover of a newspaper. And I do think that, you know, it's just by chance that you and I are here speaking on this, but the fact that there are these other people who suddenly learned and started to see how this script is not violent, but it's really beautiful, and it doesn't have to be something that's ingrained in necessarily something religious, but something pop, something powerful. And I think that speaks louder, you know, and somehow your existence transferred to this little place where everybody was trying to get food, everybody was like sort of overheated, and we had a beautiful moment because of something that you created. And it was really foreign, and it's something that's born from something othered, something violent. And yeah.
You know, it was like, I'm verklempt. I guess it was meant for me to come on this panel to hear that, because I have had a lot of uncertainty about my work and my practice and like livelihood as through my work. It's very, it's thank you for saying that really deeply, because that reminds me that one of my roles is to heal. And I think that's the best thing that I can do, and that I'm best at, instead of trying to see how I can fight. Because maybe that it's through healing is the way to kind of reject like narratives and histories and pasts that were violent and awful, and to create something new. And so it really, really touched me to hear that deeply, as I was trying to play with, I'm terrible at this like stuff that like my headphones don't work, and then suddenly I have to put on this. So I'm like, I didn't even hear what Zulfi had to say in the second part, but I got to you, and then, my eyes start to well up, because I'm Sakine Geryehu in Farsi, which is like the wet nurse that keeps crying for any drop of a hat, because it's kind of, I'm figuratively mourning. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much that meant to me.
But isn't that something as well that you're also translating for the next generations? I keep thinking about Yemenis, and I think my nieces and other people, I want them to see something that they do see themselves reflected. You started this all saying like, I'm creating this because I didn't see myself reflected. And now I think about these younger Yemenis who are also in Detroit, who are all over the world, who are a part of this diaspora, to be proud of something and not just see starving children, and say, okay, well, here's an artist, here's something beautiful. And that was a moment where I'm not Iranian, I identify as spiritually independent and Islamically and culturally Muslim. I also have, Judaic, I'm on my Yemeni side, I'm also Jewish. And so I think, and for me, there's a large rejection of that organized religion. However, when I saw the shirt, there was something that made me also so proud. And that sort of translates too. So you should just keep making, is what I'm saying. But I think that's really an honest, vulnerable point about making.
Thank you.
I do appreciate that you're simply Arabic or Farsi or Urdu, that the text is automatically racialized and put towards fear. And it reminds me of this old bowl that I wish I remember. It was art history class, about this bowl in the Byzantine era time that everyone thought was super beautiful until they realized that on it is Arabic text, and then like the value of the bowl just went down immediately and became super scary. And there's like these very old stories of how like the simple text itself is so intimidating. And I'm thinking how who she's was feeling mute in many situations. I've definitely felt that, especially living in between. and all of you use textiles. And I'm thinking of textiles as code, and how it's language, like you said, textile is a means of communicating. And if you glitch and move it, you're communicating with other people that may have references to certain patterns, and then mixing them together. Like it's like binary code without the words, without that. So I would love to ask all of you how you've instinctually, or have you thought about all jumping into textiles and coding and all like that. And maybe we could tie that textile, because Matthias, you actually, you well, all of us, right? But Matthias, within your writing, is there ways that you found ways to, like, you know, different ways of expressing and talking in the languages and in metaphor and in these codes, and still communicating, like the shirt communicated to all of you, although you might have not spoken Farsi on Hushi's shirt that was worn on that at dinner.
Yeah, I think, yeah, sorry, go on. It's hard to tell when someone's finished talking, but continue your thought.
That whole thought is really, I'd love to address that.
Yeah, because textile and like clothing is such an important thing, and it's also something that like blends into this whole idea of like past and future, and like, you know, being someone that's in the diaspora in a lot of ways is like in this in between, you know, you're in a different place or a different physical country, and it's kind of like what Anum was saying, like you're not really there or here or whatever, so it's not a physicality place, and it's a lot like time, where, you know, a lot of you are gravitating towards and evolving your practice towards the present, because like the future and the past just aren't doing it, and it's kind of like this in between melded like thing. And I think diaspora has that, and the way that we connect through either digital communication like we're doing now in different places and countries, or like connect through like what we're wearing. Like Zeina and I were like, oh, what should we wear? Like, do we look cute in this? And it has like this whole thing about like, you know, connecting through the past and the future, and also a language that, you know, you might not speak that like written language, but you can still connect and know about this, because through patterns and through the past, and also imagine future, because that's something like a lot of you do, is take things from the past and merge it into something that's futuristic. And I guess what is called now like the present is what we're enjoying it. And I think that's why like Matthias's work is also so important, because, you know, culturally all of us have grown up in like Muslim households, and like thinking about science fiction in that culture in a way that like reflects and honors like the past, but also has the possibilities of the future, is something that's so important. And I think that you all do it in your practices, even you in your research. So I think that's like a really beautiful discussion. And I just love how it's all flowing. Like Zeina and I are just like, like we can't even like get a word in. So like we just wanted to like, yeah, thank you. Whoever wants to talk can go first.
Well,
Sorry,
I love. I love that we've begun talking so much about textiles, and I love what you, I think, Alia, said about the word text coming from textile. And I think when you're writing a book, or when you're writing any kind of text, you're also thinking about threads, right? And it is an elegant weaving of threads that make a good story, that make a good book. So I love these connections between text and textiles here. What I also find exciting about textile, I feel that there is something universal perhaps about textile, in that like pretty much all humans wear clothes, and that perhaps there is not an infinite number of cuts that would work on a human body, right? With like just our human dimensions, our curves, etc. So I love that perhaps textiles can also transcend cultures. Yeah, these are some thoughts of mine.
May I comment on the textile thing, because that got me excited? Who she's like, textiles, comment on the textile. So there were a few things. So on this history past tangent that we're on, so a couple of things. One of the reasons that got me into futurism was that I was already working with making up histories. So I was already sort of toying with this idea of an alternate history of Karachi had it not been colonized by the British, let's say. Who would have come, who would have gone, what would have been like. And that project never really lifted beyond scribbles and my imagination. And I like that. Some projects I keep to myself, I don't put out into the world because it makes them feel that much more mine. But there's, so futurism came from that, which is the fact that history is made up, right? And what we have of history is stories. So even the history that's written in the history is also made up, right? So, or I mean, some maybe not, depending, of course, on what standpoint you're looking at it from. But you know, for example, the thing that really got me into futurism was also reading stories of Islam and even reading the Word of God, reading the Quran. And reading about Bilqis in the Quran was especially exciting. You know, the fact that Solomon had this Jinniya wife, a half Jinniya wife, and he had a whole temple built by jinn, and only because jinn could work metal. And the fact that the Dome of the Rock is actually a rebuilding of Solomon's temple. In fact, it's both a commemoration of the Prophet's ascension and it's a rebuilding of Solomon's temple. You know, when Omar went to Al-Aqsa, when he went to Al-Quds, he cleaned up the Wailing Wall. It was a trash dump used by the Byzantines. They were insulting the Jews, and Omar went and cleaned it. Sorry, Osman. Someone needs to correct my Arabic history, my Islamic history here. It was either Omar or Osman. Either way, as Shias don't recognize them, but I recognize this deed. That he cleaned up the Wailing Wall, and he rebuilt Solomon's temple. So that's one thing. Now, textiles. Sorry, my mind got really excited. Textiles. For me, my main inspiration was Shia textiles during Muharram. The textiles that are taken out and kept, actually, I mean, they're changed from red to black